So I'm going to go to my onStart, and what's kind of typical in here is you might start placing a bunch of formulas that maybe do certain things. Maybe you want to store some values, maybe you want to define a color, maybe you want to define any of your app settings or your app parameters. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, we have I don't know, a text size, or we want to define the size of our text, and we want to use that everywhere, so we don't have to keep remembering and clicking back through and changing the numbers. We can just use a variable. A typical thing that you would do in here is you would write something like set with an open and close brackets, and inside of the set formula you would give it a name. So we could perhaps call this we'll say bar name, and we'll give it a value, and I'm just going to say Connor for now. And that's one way to define a variable. Now, you might have hundreds of these. You might add a semicolon and start adding tons more of these. So you could have things, like I say, a typical use case for your onStart would be things like the app parameters. So let's say, for example, you have specific color themes that you want to use. You want to define a set of colors. You can do that in here as well. I said there's loads of things that you can use this for, and I'll show you some examples of how I've used it in just a second. But what named formulas gives you the ability to do now, this might not be available for everybody at the moment. I believe it has now fully rolled out, but you should see under the app property here, you should see under your drop down, you should see formulas. Can I just get a thumbs up if anyone's following along and they actually do see formulas, or let me know if you're not seeing formulas underneath this drop down. So if you're not seeing formulas underneath this drop down, you'll need to find this under the settings and upcoming features, and it might not have released fully to your kind of location, your geolocation, where all these updates are going. So the way you do that is you find, I believe if you type formulas, now I know that for me it's not going to appear on here because it is already now a kind of production ready thing, but you'll find named formulas under experimental, I believe it is, and you should be able to just enable that. GCC has it. Woot. Nice, awesome. Yeah, so formulas, how do these work? How do these named formulas work? So before I actually show you how to write out a named formula, I just want to kind of highlight again some of the benefits of actually using named formulas. So if anybody's familiar with the way formulas are written in a general sense, and this isn't just on the app onStart, this could be anywhere in your app, they run in a linear fashion. And what we mean by that is it will run line 1, then it will run line 2, then it will run line 3, and it will run through all of these. Let's say, for example, I had 100 variables inside of my app onStart. It would run through each of these 100 variables one by one, and that is what causes your app time or your delay in your app loading to actually happen. Now, the perks of named formulas is that they are run only when they are called upon. So they are always available, whether the app has started or not. As it's loading, maybe you don't need a formula until 7 screens into a process that you've built. It will only use that formula whenever it's called upon. It doesn't run it at runtime, and that's the benefits of putting them inside of the named formulas, or the formulas property that we have here. Let's have a quick look at chat. Collections pulling the SharePoint list. Nice. I don't put much in. So yes, this is just I just realised John's put a question in here. What do we use? No,
it's good. It's backing up all you're saying, Connor, and you've touched on it there, isn't it? The data load use case for onStart is used so often, but what you've just said there could be really fascinating to see the impact upon the user experience. If you only load data when it's needed, yeah, you might have a lag at that point, but hey, if you don't need it for most of your use cases, this could be really interesting to dig into.
Yeah, so just on the data side of things, so what I believe that named formulas doesn't give you the ability to do is you can't kind of hold on to data until it's needed as such as the actual data that actually gets pumped into Power Apps. So for example, if we come to this data tab here, whenever we're adding data in here, such as SharePoint lists, Dataverse tables, all that stuff is loaded when the app starts. There's no way around that. However, let's say for example you're doing something with that data. Maybe you're filtering it, you're pulling out a specific row from a Dataverse table, and you typically do that inside of formulas using lookups and filters. That's the sort of thing that you can place inside of named formulas and only call when it's actually needed. So again, it saves having to go through that whole process of going, okay, I've got a list of 100 users or 10,000 users inside of a Dataverse table, and I want to specifically pick out John Mandeville's name and store that for use later. In a typical use case, you'd be performing lookups and filters to find John, and you'd be having to do that every single time you wanted to actually find John. And we'll go into dynamicness of that in a second. But essentially, yeah, that formula's gonna have to run every single time you want to find John. Whereas if you have it in a named formula, that will only run when it needs to, rather than having to do that filter query every single time. And again, just on the kind of what I mentioned there about the kind of dynamicness, if that's a word, dynamicness.
We'll go with it, Connor. We haven't butchered a word for a while. Let's go with it.
Yeah, in terms of the dynamicness of named formulas. So one thing that it does do is any dependencies that the named formula relies on. So let's say, for example, you're pointing to a Dataverse table, and maybe you're looking at doing some calculations against a collection. It will always keep those collections in that Dataverse table up to date to keep the value of your named formula up to date as well. So one thing that you can't do with named formulas is you can't rewrite a new value to a named formula. They are kind of static outputs, but that output can be dynamic. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. I can see John's thinking there as well.
Yeah, I'll probably need an example for what you mean there. So what would that look like?
Okay, say for example, you had 10 rows inside of a collection, and you specifically every single time want to pick out the last row from that table. Let's say, for example, this table gets updated every minute, every couple of minutes, whatever it might be, and that last row could change. Because you're specifically pointing to the last row, it's going to allow you to receive new updates straight away inside of that variable. You don't have to run any more queries, any more filters against it to get the new data. So you're always going to get the output, if that makes sense, from that specific collection. You're always going to get that last row. What I mean by the fact that you can't dynamically change the output is you can't then go and say, okay, actually, I want this named formula now that I've written to give me the first row from that table.
Okay.
So that's what I mean there. You can still get a different data value come out at the end of it, but you can't change where it looks for that output, if that makes sense.
So you could have a named formula. I presume you're going to show us this, but one that's called get first or one that's get last, and you could have those calls made from anywhere to go and get the first or the last, depending what you want to use. Is that fair to say?
Yes, but like I say, once you've got the get first or the get last, you wouldn't be able to change it. You can only come into the actual named formulas area underneath this formulas drop down here and change it directly in here. So what this also does is it protects you from accidentally changing formulas, and it's very easy for that to happen, especially throughout complex builds inside of Power Apps, where it might be very easy to go and change a value of a variable, for example. You can't do that in here, which is nice. So you're keeping everything kind of safe, kind of buckled down, and not being able to kind of adjust it to that level. But yeah, it still comes in very handy for a lot of things. So I'm just going to quickly show you again how to write these, because we've not actually gone into that yet. So first, look at my app on start. So you can see here that we've got our set var name, and this is set var name Connor. And that is just a string value that's coming out of this. Now, inside of formulas, if I wanted to write this, I could start with the name of the variable. So just remember what we called it, because I've already forgotten. So it's called var name. That was what we called this variable. Now for our named formula, we can do exactly the same thing. So we can use var name, and we then use equals. So we're saying that the name of this formula is var name, and it's going to equal, and then that's where we type in the value. So again, I can just type in Connor here. Now, one thing that you do have to do with named formulas, even if you're not starting a new line, is add a semicolon on the end. And I'm not sure why that's, I think that might be because I've already written it in here. I'm just going to comment that out. And there you go. That's got rid of the error. So essentially, we're writing exactly the same thing, but we're not storing it as a variable. We're storing it as a named formula. Now, these named formulas, just like variables, can also be used inside of your app. So let's say, for example, I wanted to go and grab this value and place it inside of a text label. I can just come and add a text label. And inside of here, we can just type in the name of our formula. And we can see that that is there as Connor. So like I say, you can't, for example, go and update what that value might be. So I can't go and say, right, actually, I want to go change the name to be John. If you want to change that, you have to come into the named formulas section under your app, and you have to change it in here. There's no way to access these formulas to say, okay, go and change something in the formula. And that's why these are quite secure and quite useful as well.
So really useful in retrieval of data or retrieval of something as a result of an action to present it, rather than the dynamically changing things.
Yes, but that is not to say that you can't do things like conditions inside of named formulas as well. Yeah. You could write a condition in here. You can do lookups in here. You can do filters inside of named formulas as well, to be able to actually almost create that dynamic essence to this. So that's basically how you write formulas. And there's a few other examples that I did want to kind of quickly try and go over if I've got time. And that is how named formulas can basically create their own enumeration into things as well. So one thing that we've already seen, again, if you've taken the Jumpstart or any of the Power Apps challenges, is you've probably seen the user formula being used all the time, which looks something like this. I'm going to go place this directly in my label, which looks something like this. So you've got user, open and close brackets, and then for user full stop, we can enumerate down into that user's email, their full name, and their image. So for example, if I do user full name here, we're just going to get back Connor DC. It's going to bring up my full name from my Office 365 account, which is logged into Power Apps. Now, again, you can place these type of formulas. Again, this is kind of just going a little bit to that next level to create your own sort of enumeration into these. So let's say, for example, that instead of me having to type out user open and close brackets dot full name every time I wanted to retrieve the name of the logged in user, we could do something really simple. We could just type in, I don't know, for example, let's call this me, because we know that every time that this runs, it's going to return back whoever the current user is anyway. We can say that me equals user. And again, we can just do a semicolon at the end. And what this gives you the ability to do is, because we're not enumerating down into that full name, we don't have to type in user open and close brackets. Now, I know this isn't the best example because it's already quite a simple formula, but it just kind of highlights what's possible in here. So if I go back to my text label, we can do me. So we can go and retrieve me from the named formulas. And if we do a full stop, because it knows that the value is user open and close brackets, we can just enumerate down straight into that object that comes back. For example, let's go grab my email address. And that's going to bring me back my email address. Now you can see, obviously, that this isn't that normal formula that you're looking at. However, the email that's coming back from here is coming back from that user open and close brackets that we put in as the value. We're bringing back the user, and we're able to then access the named formula, the name of it, to then enumerate down into our email object. So Valerie says, Sorry, Lynn says, when is it updating? I'm not sure if I mentioned. So yeah, it updates obviously whenever it needs to use it. So for example, it would only check that formula whenever it's being used. For example, this screen becomes available. It's now got this this formula in here, which is accessing me. It's going to go and run and check that formula at that specific point when it needs to show this label. So that's the kind of beauty of this. You don't need to run everything when the app starts. You can kind of share the workload kind of over each of the processes of your app.
Yeah, and I guess like typically something like the user function that you showed there, that might be something you might want to do quite early on in your app flow, because then you've got that throughout, isn't it? But yeah, another example you could imagine would be quite good, because you're sort of spreading the load of that execution to where it's needed and if it's needed. Yeah, to Valerie's point, I mean, it'd be an interesting one to know what people's feelings are about this as a practice. Would you say, Connor, this feels like kind of being a little bit kinder to your future self, because you could use names like that, like me, but then again, user is quite friendly, I guess. I mean, I'm intrigued as to when I might be compelled to use this practice.
So yeah, that kind of comes in with the next example, and again, I'm
Cool.
going to show you one sort of way that you can do this. I mean, we know there's hundreds of properties and attributes inside of Power Apps that we might want to do, but let's say, for example, you have a theme inside of your app. You have specific colors that you might want to use in your app. Let's say, for example, there is specific headings that you want to use inside of your app as well, and you want to use these throughout. You don't want to have to keep looking back at perhaps documentation for your app to go, okay, well, what size does this text need to be? What font does this text need to be? And all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, like brand guidelines.
Yeah, you can kind of bake that into your app. And again, you could do this before with the app on start, but this is just a much cleaner and smoother way of doing it. So I'm going to show you this as well. So if I come back to my app and go to my named formulas, we're just going to leave that in there for now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to define what perhaps a heading 1 looks like. Now, heading 1, just for anybody that isn't familiar with HTML, heading 1 is essentially your titles inside of your apps. Let's say, for example, you've got a bunch of title labels on each of your screens, and you don't want to have to go manually change every single property of those of each title. You can kind of define what they look like and what they're supposed to be inside of your named formulas here, because again, that's unlikely to change. So for this one, I'm going to define this with a name. I'm going to call it heading 1. Makes sense? Wherever I want to write or adjust my heading 1 properties, I can go and pull them now from my named formulas. So I'm going to say heading 1 equals. And again, anyone's familiar with formulas knows that you can do things like write tables and such inside of formulas. So I could say, for example, in using curly brackets, that under my heading 1, I want to define maybe a few things. Let's say I want to define a weight, which is going to be whether it's bold, italic, normal, the weight of my font. And I can use again a colon here to differentiate the difference between the column and the actual value when we write tables inside of here. And I can actually just go ahead and point to the font weight property, and let's say I want all of my headings I want to be bold. What other options do we have? So let's say I want to also give me a size property, and I want to say that the size I want to be 24. So all of my heading 1s are going to be font weight bold, and they're going to be a size 24. And again, I can just close that off with a closed curly brackets there. And again, making sure that we put our semicolon on the end, because that is something that is, again, it kind of goes against everything else that Power Apps does. You only need a semicolon if you create a new line. Whereas this, with formulas, you always need it no matter what at the end. So there we have just defined our heading 1, and we've got 2 properties in here, our weight and our size. Now, if I wanted to go and use these, for example, we can go and select on one of our text labels. And let's say, for example, we want this to be a heading. Unlikely that your email would be a heading, but we're going to go with it anyway. And we can simply just go and find things like the font weight. And instead of defining it in here and going, oh, right, well, does my heading need to be bold? And then you have to go and look at one of your other headings or look at your documentation to go and find out how each page should be built. We can literally just point to it. We can just say heading 1, and then we can use our full stop to enumerate down. And we want to say weight, because we know that our font weight is always bold. You can see that that's just turned into a bold font weight there. And again, same with the size as well. So we can do things like, again, heading 1 dot size. See, it's gone nice and big, so we've got our kind of nice heading in there as well. And what this does mean as well is by referencing it in this way, by pointing to heading 1, if, let's say, for example, John's really unhappy with the app that I built for him, and he goes, no, you need to change all of the colors of the app. You need to change the perhaps the sizing of the app as well. The great thing about it is you don't have to come into every single text label and change that. It's a great place to store, like I say, the app settings. We can come in here, we can change this. Let's say we want it nice and small. We can change that to 12, and you can see that's just straight away changed there inside of our label. And that will happen and calculate across all of the areas where you're again referencing this this formula. So it's kind of also a very good practice to kind of get into the habit of, especially when dealing with some of the design elements inside of Power Apps.
It's a phrase we use a lot, isn't it? Be kind to your future self, and it's reading to me very much like that, Connor. It's going a little step beyond the variables that you might name var something and giving you real usable objects to go and enumerate down, as you refer to it, to get those values dynamically that you need. That's really nice, that what you just showed there, where you changed it and it was instantaneously updating. No more load the app on start to get it to update. That's cool. Yeah, I like that.
And again, I'll show you that in my final example, which is where I'm going to dive into an existing app.
You notice you have a hand up, Connor, from Lynn.
Oh, hi, Lynn.
Just quickly, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So when we do the variables, they're running in the on start, but for example, in this case, the size would be read once and it would persist. Is this changing that behavior, and it's got to check every single time we use size? And does that have a performance hit?
So no. Whenever it basically runs on the when the screen uses that value, so it loads once on a kind of per screen basis, and then formulas, basically the only time that they are ever changed is, for example, if it needs to dynamically find its new dependency, whatever piece of information it's looking for, then it will update that in real time. So it doesn't do it on a kind of per control basis, if that makes sense.
Okay, so that's what my question was before. When is it updating? So it's updating real time. It's updating when the change occurs.
Yes.
Okay, and I only look for it when I load the screen. For it. The app only looks for it when it loads the screen.
Yes, so just to clarify on that as well, so it doesn't look for your named formulas section. That's not what it's looking for here. What it's doing is it understands that named formulas exist, and it's looking for your specific named formula. So the benefits of this compared to that app on start that you had is, like I say, it's that linear fashion. Let's say, for example, you've got 1,000 formulas inside of your named formulas. You don't want to be checking that that's running or pulling down that information every single time it needs it. It doesn't run linearly. It literally looks specifically for the named formula that you're using, and then it will grab the information that it needs from there. It won't even try and load anything else that it's not using, which is the benefit of this.
Love it. You have another question, Connor. I don't know if you have time. Would this work with clear collects, well, for collections?
So I believe it does, because again, you can run a collection based on a button action, for example. So let's say heading 1, again, I'm using this as an example. Let's say heading 1 did a clear collect. I probably don't have time to demo this. If heading 1 had a clear collect in it, and that clear collect was obviously the value of this named formula. Let's say, for example, you want to place that inside of a button. All you'd have to do is point to whatever the name of the formula is, because you've got the clear collect inside of the value. So yes, clear collects would work inside of this. So just as one final example, so you're probably wondering, okay, maybe I already have an app that I want to kind of refactor into using this method, because maybe I do have a lot of formulas. Maybe the performance is quite bad when it starts. Again, I don't have anything too extravagant to show compared to what I have seen in Power Apps, but again, I'll just quickly demonstrate this. So, for example, just get rid of all of these.
Getting lots of those, aren't we?
Yeah, it pops up all the time. So inside this app here, this is my poker build app. Again, we're not going to go into the ins and outs of this. But inside of my app on start, now this is the typical place where I would be writing a bunch of formulas. And again, this runs linearly. So this is the sort of thing that we have here. Let me just make sure that I haven't got rid of that. Kind of stepped ahead a little bit there. But this is the sort of thing that you would see. And I'm not sure why that's doing what it's doing. All these pop-ups. Just bear with me 2 seconds. If I can just refresh that. I may have already messed up this up a little bit in some testing, so I'll jump to another one if that's the case. Okay, so
yeah,
of course it's not going to let me write formulas in at the moment, isn't it?
I must admit, I had that same experience, Connor. I loaded up make.powerapps.com, and on a brand new app, the formula bar was locked, which I've never noticed before. So something we need to investigate on our Power Platform setup.
It's AI taken over, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's decided to lock us out of our own screens.
Right. What I will do is let's go back to our. I believe that this is almost a duplicate version, which should be enough for me to just show you this little bit of the demo. I've been having a lot of issues changing properties drop down or just navigating inside of Power Apps in general lately. Yeah, it's been a little bit kind of flaky. Okay, so hopefully this is going to be fine. So if I again go back to my app and my on start, again, this isn't as complex as what it was previously, but this is a sort of typical thing that you would see. So you'll see all of these kind of set variables. I'm setting the color of the primary color of my app, the secondary color of my app, the third color of my app as well. And here I'm defining, for example, who the current user is. And again, I'm using a lookup to do that. But again, the idea is that we can put as minimal stuff as we need to inside of the app on start. So essentially, the way that you would refactor this, like I say before, is again, we can just copy the things that we want to refactor. I'm happy to just copy those for now. I know that this is a formula that I want to run when the app starts. That is a specific use case that I have. But I could just come up to the formulas in here, and we can just paste that in, and we can change what these formulas are. So you can see at the moment I've got var current user, I've got var primary color, and var secondary color, and var tertiary color. Now these are the names of variables that my app is using throughout. So I don't really want to change the name of the variable here. I mean, you could do find and replace if you wanted to, but again, just for the sake of this video, all you actually have to do is remove the set at the beginning, remove the extra bracket on the end, because that is against the set formulas that you have. So just remove the set wrapper that sits around this. And then you just replace this first comma with an equals sign. like that. Now, making sure that I think I know why that is working. Again, that's because they're still actually active inside of my app on start. So I'm just going to comment those out for the purpose of this demo, because it's trying to register a variable and a name format at the same time and doesn't know what to do with it. You can see there you go, all of my squiggly lines are gone. So that's how you'd refactor this for your app. You can see all my colors are still working nicely there. If I want to change this to I believe a red, there we go. You can see that all changes in real time there as well. So again, no need to use the app on start. And again, just whilst I'm here on the app on start, a common thing to do is to navigate to your first screen on the app on start. Now there's other ways around that now. There has been for a while, probably over a year, but I still see people trying to do it. And it's unnecessary now. You also have a start screen section here where you can define what the name of your start screen is, which is the screen that loads when the app starts. You don't need to place that in the app on start. Alternatively, you can also make sure that whichever screen you want to run first is at the top of your tree view, where you're moving up or down on here as well, and that will define what screen gets loaded.